My name is Isabel. I'm 30 years old, and I live between Denver and Napa Valley. That morning, the sun had barely risen over the Rockies when my phone buzzed with a short message from my mother. 8 words, clean and cold. Easter brunch this year, just your sister's family. I stared at the screen for a long moment, the silence in my apartment stretching thin. Then I typed back 2 words that tasted like finality. Have fun. Just like that, another holiday was erased from my calendar. The same hollow pattern I'd known all my life, Venus in the center of the table, me somewhere on the fringe, holding a polite smile while everyone else basked in her glow. I could almost hear the clinking of silverware, the laughter circling around her, the familiar line my parents loved to say. Venus is such a delight. The ache was sharp but strangely quiet this time, because what they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I wasn't the same girl waiting for an invitation anymore. 3 years ago, I bought a $6 million vineyard hidden in the golden hills of Napa Valley. It's my secret world, my proof that I can build something beautiful without needing anyone's permission. And this year, I won't sit alone. I'll host my own Easter brunch beneath the vines and invite everyone who ever felt forgotten. Have you ever been excluded from your own family's celebration? If you have, tell me where you're listening from so I know that on this journey, I'm not alone. Growing up, my life was a long rehearsal for invisibility. My parents, Judy and Robert, never said they loved one of us more, but everything about our home whispered it loudly enough. My younger sister, Venus, was the sun around which the entire family revolved. She was beautiful even as a child, blonde curls, dimples, the kind of easy laughter that made adults melt. Every neighbor, every visiting aunt, every teacher my mother chatted with at the grocery store heard the same introduction. This is Venus, our youngest, she's such a star. And when I trailed behind, clutching a book or carrying the grocery bags, they'd add, as if by obligation. And that's Isabel, Venus's sister. It was never Isabel on my own. Always a shadow tied to her name. I learned early how to nod and smile through it. When I was 14, one Easter morning carved itself permanently into my memory. The living room smelled of glazed ham and cinnamon rolls, sunlight spilling across the carpet as my parents set the pastel baskets on the table. I remember the soft rustle of tissue paper, the shimmer of foil-wrapped eggs, the excitement in Venus's eyes as she tore through her basket. At the bottom, nestled between a pink ribbon and a chocolate bunny, was a gold bracelet with her initials delicately engraved. Mom kissed her cheek and said, "You deserve this, sweetheart. You've made us so proud." I waited, my heart thumping with quiet hope, scanning the table for one with my name. There wasn't any. Just the empty space where something should have been. When Mom noticed me looking, she smiled that distracted, half-apologetic smile and said, "You're older now, honey. You don't need toys anymore." I nodded, pretending to agree, pretending it didn't matter. But something inside me cracked that day, not from the missing bracelet, but from the confirmation that I was already fading from their frame. That pattern never changed. Venus danced through life collecting praise like Easter eggs hidden just for her. When she became captain of the cheerleading team, Dad threw a barbecue for the entire neighborhood. When she won her first debate, Mom sent out photos with captions about her brilliant little girl. When I won first place at the science fair for building a small autonomous drone from scratch, they simply said, "That's nice, Izzy, but don't stay up so late tinkering. You'll ruin your eyes." The next day, they told everyone at brunch about Venus's latest performance instead. My project sat on the shelf in the garage until it gathered dust. Even family dinners revolved around her orbit. Dad would ask, "How's Venus's practice going?" Mom would add, "Her coach says she's a natural leader." I'd try to chime in, to share that I'd been invited to a state-level competition or that I'd fixed our old computer from spare parts. But the moment I spoke, someone would interrupt with, "Oh, that reminds me, Venus needs a new uniform before next week." The conversation would slide away like water off glass, leaving me with my half-finished sentence hanging in the air. I learned to stop trying. Holidays were the hardest. Easter, Thanksgiving, Christmas. Every celebration was another reminder that I was an extra in someone else's story. Venus's name was stitched on every stocking, carved into every pastel egg, printed on every handmade card. Mine was either missing or misspelled. Mom said it was an oversight. Dad said, "Don't be sensitive." But when you grow up being told not to be sensitive, you start mistaking numbness for strength. I told myself I didn't care about the baskets, the gifts, the applause. I told myself I was better off being quiet, invisible, independent. But each year, when I saw Venus's perfect little world glitter under the spring sunlight, the family photos, the matching dresses, the laughter that excluded me, I felt the same hollow echo deep inside. No basket for Isabel, no name on the egg. The cruel part was, Venus wasn't cruel. She didn't rub it in, she didn't even notice. She was simply the chosen one, her smile enough to win over anyone. And maybe that's what hurt the most, that her perfection didn't come from malice, but from the way everyone else decided she was worth celebrating. My parents didn't see me working late in the garage, soldering circuits under the dim light. They didn't see the notebooks full of equations, the quiet victories that came without applause. To them, I was just steady, serious Isabel, the one who didn't need attention because she could handle herself. That label stuck to me for years. Strong one. Independent one. Doesn't need help. It sounded like praise, but it was really permission for them to overlook me. Every time Venus stumbled, there was a safety net waiting: new tutors, private coaches, comforting hugs. Every time I struggled, there was silence, followed by, "You'll figure it out, you always do." I did, but it cost me pieces of warmth. I didn't realize I was losing until later. Looking back, I can still picture that 14-year-old girl sitting quietly on the couch, watching her sister hold up the golden bracelet, everyone clapping, the camera flash bright against the window. I can feel the tiny tremor in her hands as she folded the napkin over her lap and whispered, "It's fine." I wish I could go back and tell her that it wasn't fine. That the missing basket wasn't just about a forgotten gift, it was the beginning of a pattern, one that would teach her to shrink so others could shine. When I turned 17, I thought the tide might finally turn in my favor. The day the thick envelope from Stanford arrived, I ran into the living room with it still trembling in my hands, my heart pounding so hard I could barely speak. "I got in," I whispered, my voice breaking into a laugh, half shock, half joy. Dad looked up from the newspaper, squinting as though I had interrupted something trivial. "Stanford?" he said after a pause. "That's so far away. Are you sure that's a good idea?" "Venus is applying to Boulder. It's closer, much more convenient for everyone." Mom nodded, already lost in thoughts of her youngest. "Maybe you could transfer later, once you realize how lonely it gets so far from home." I stood there, the letter crinkling in my hands, the black and white crest staring up at me like a secret they couldn't understand. I wanted them to be proud, to say finally, "Isabel, you did it." Instead, all I got was the same undertone of dismissal. "You're the difficult one for wanting more." I left anyway. The morning I packed, Venus was still asleep, her room a pastel museum of trophies and curling ribbons. Mom hugged me quickly, like she was late for something, and Dad said, "Call when you get there." The drive to California felt endless miles of asphalt stretching between who I was and who I might become. When I finally stepped onto the Stanford campus, I breathed in the scent of eucalyptus and freedom, but it came with the heavy taste of solitude. My scholarship covered tuition, but not much else. Books, food, housing, I had to find a way on my own. I picked up shifts in the library cafe, sometimes working until midnight, my fingers raw from handling dishes. Other nights, I cleaned classrooms, pushing brooms across the tile while listening to recorded lectures through borrowed headphones. I learned to live on almost nothing. Instant noodles became dinner, sometimes breakfast too. My mattress was a second-hand sofa from a graduating senior, my closet a stack of boxes under the bed. I remember the first winter, the cold creeping through the thin apartment walls while I typed code with numb fingers, trying to stay awake long enough to finish an assignment. When I called home, hoping to hear some hint of encouragement, Mom answered distractedly. "Venus's just been chosen for the state debate finals." "Isn't that wonderful?" I said it was. I didn't mention that I was skipping meals to pay rent. Still, something inside me hardened and brightened at the same time. I stopped wishing they'd notice and started focusing on surviving. My major was computer science, but I became fascinated by logistics, how information could move things faster than trucks ever could. During sophomore year, I started building a small project with 2 classmates, a system that could reroute shipments in real time to reduce waste. It was clunky and half-broken at first, but it was mine. We worked out of a borrowed lab, eating cold pizza and writing code until dawn. I remember once, after 3 straight nights without sleep, watching the simulation finally work, tiny dots of data moving across the screen like a living network. I cried quietly, not from exhaustion, but from the certainty that for the first time in my life, something I built actually worked. Money was still tight. There were weeks when I had to choose between a textbook and groceries, when I fixed my broken laptop with duct tape and a paperclip. But I carried one thought with me like a mantra. You don't need their applause to exist. Every time that old voice whispered, "You're the unnecessary child," I would stay up an extra hour, rewriting lines of code, teaching myself what no one else thought I could learn. The question that used to haunt me, "Am I the leftover child?" slowly began to transform into something sharper. What if being leftover means I get to start from scratch? By the time I graduated, Venus had already finished law school with family celebrations and champagne toasts. I remember watching the photos online, Mom in a floral dress, Dad holding the bouquet, Venus's smile framed by balloons that spelled our star. No one mentioned that I was graduating the same month. My diploma came in the mail, sealed in a cardboard tube. I opened it alone in my apartment, smoothing out the paper on the kitchen counter, whispering the words printed in gold, Bachelor of Science, Stanford University. The silence around me was thick, but for once, it didn't feel empty. It felt earned. That summer, I got an internship with a small logistics firm in Oakland. They didn't pay much, but they let me use the data from their old system to keep developing my prototype. Every evening, after everyone else went home, I stayed in the dim office, coding while the janitor mopped the hallways. Sometimes he'd stop and ask, "Don't you ever sleep?" And I'd laugh, saying, "Maybe next week." I was obsessed, not with success, but with proving to myself more than anyone that I could build something lasting out of the parts of me no one had wanted. When I finally pitched my system to a group of small hospitals for trial use, I did it over a Zoom call using a borrowed microphone and a mug of coffee that had gone cold. They said yes. It wasn't a big contract, just a 6-month test run, but it paid enough to cover rent for the first time without panic. I remember walking outside afterward, the evening fog rolling over the bay. My reflection faint in a shop window. I didn't look like much. Messy bun, thrift store jacket, exhaustion written all over my face, but I smiled anyway. For the first time, I realized that every ignored moment, every empty Easter basket, every silent dinner had trained me for this exact feeling. Doing everything alone and surviving it. There were still nights when loneliness came like a storm, whispering that I was building all this for no one, that no matter what I achieved, my family would never see me. But another voice, small and firm, would answer, "Maybe that's the point. Maybe this isn't about being seen, it's about becoming real." By the time I turned 23, that quiet determination had become my armor. I stopped waiting for validation and started writing my own story, line by line, mile by mile, paycheck by paycheck. Every decision, every sleepless night over a glowing screen was a brick in the foundation of something they couldn't erase. And though I didn't know it yet, all those nights spent coding alone under the flicker of fluorescent light were planting the first seeds of a future far from their table. A vineyard, bathed in sunlight, waiting to bloom. The first version of my company was built on panic, caffeine, and faith. After graduation, I convinced 2 classmates to join me in turning the routing project into a small startup focused on medical logistics. We called it MedChain. The idea was simple. Hospitals were losing millions each year because supplies didn't reach the right place at the right time. If we could build an algorithm that tracked every shipment and redirected it instantly when emergencies hit, we could save lives and money. It sounded revolutionary on paper. In reality, it was chaos. We worked out of a cramped warehouse office in Oakland, half of our computers secondhand, the other half borrowed. I slept on a couch wedged between filing cabinets. We had no investors, no safety net, and only one credit card, mine, nearly maxed out. By the 3rd month, our bank balance was down to $426. Payroll was due in 3 days. My co-founder, Mark, stared at the spreadsheet like it was a death sentence. "We're done, Izzy," he said. "No one's going to trust a bunch of 20-somethings with hospital logistics." He wasn't wrong. Every cold email, every pitch, every call ended the same way: too risky. That night, I sat alone in the flickering blue light of my monitor, scrolling through contact lists until my eyes blurred. Then I saw at a small hospital in Fresno that had once reached out months earlier about route optimization but never followed up. On impulse, I wrote, "Give us 1 week, no charge. If it doesn't cut your delivery time by half, we'll delete the software ourselves." The reply came the next morning. 1 week. We didn't sleep for 5 days. We coded through takeout meals and power naps, patching bugs while the system processed live hospital shipments. When the week ended, the hospital's director called. His tone was cautious, but there was a trace of awe. "Your system rerouted a critical oxygen delivery in under an hour," he said. "You just saved us $30,000 and 2 lives." I sank into the chair, the tears hitting before the words did. We sent the invoice, barely believing it would clear. It did. Payroll made it through that month. We survived. Then, almost overnight, the world changed. The pandemic swept across the country like wildfire, and suddenly every hospital was desperate for what we'd built. Masks, ventilators, gloves, all trapped in warehouses while frontline workers begged for supplies. Our little startup, once ignored, became a lifeline. We repurposed every line of code for emergency routing. We worked 16-hour days, eyes burning, hands shaking over keyboards as trucks moved across the map in real time. Every blinking dot represented a shipment of hope. One night, I got a call from a nurse in New York. "Your system just rerouted 200 ventilators from a warehouse in Texas," she said, her voice breaking. We were hours away from running out. I thanked her, then hung up and cried in the empty office. It wasn't about success or survival anymore. It was about purpose. For once, I wasn't chasing my family's approval. I was doing something that mattered. Within a year, we scaled beyond anything we imagined. 50 healthcare systems signed on. News outlets called us the nervous system of America's medical supply chain. Our story hit Forbes, Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal. I stood on the Forbes 30 Under 30 stage under blinding lights, clutching the plaque with shaking hands. Cameras flashed, applause echoed, but a small part of me still asked the same question. Will they even read this? That night, I sent a link to my parents. No reply. When the acquisition offer came, a Fortune 500 corporation wanting to buy MedChain for $120 million, I didn't believe it at first. I reread the email 4 times, convinced it was spam. The deal took months to close, a blur of lawyers, signatures, and champagne I didn't drink. When it was done, I walked out of the office into the warm California evening, my phone buzzing with congratulatory texts. I looked at the city skyline glowing pink and gold and realized I was free. Free from scarcity. Free from the invisible hunger that had driven me for so long. But freedom felt strangely quiet. I called home again that weekend. Dad answered after the 3rd ring. "Hey Dad," I began, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "We just closed the deal. MedChain got acquired." There was a pause, the faint clink of dishes in the background. "That's nice," he said finally. "You know, Venus just made partner track at her firm in Boston. We're so proud of her." I swallowed hard, forcing a laugh. "That's great," I said. "Tell her congratulations." When we hung up, I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling the same old ache rise again, the kind that doesn't sting anymore, just leaves you hollow. A month later, there was a family gathering at my parents' house in Indiana. I flew in, thinking maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The house looked the same: white curtains, pastel walls, the smell of lemon cleaner and pot roast. Venus arrived in a cream blazer, her husband trailing behind her, baby in arms. The moment she walked in, the room came alive. "Our brilliant attorney. You're glowing." My mother fussed over her, brushing invisible dust off her sleeve, adjusting the baby's bonnet. When I entered, Dad greeted me with a polite nod. "Oh, Izzy's here too," he said, as if I were a last-minute addition to the guest list. Dinner was long. Every story, every compliment circled back to Venus, her firm, her new house, her baby. When I finally mentioned that MedChain had been featured in Time magazine, Dad smiled vaguely and said, "That's technology, right? I never quite understand those things." But Venus's boss just called her indispensable. Everyone laughed. I laughed too, but my smile didn't reach my eyes. Later that night, I stepped out onto the porch. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of lilac. Through the window, I could see them gathered around Venus's baby, cooing like she'd given birth to the second coming of Christ. I thought of the nights I'd eaten instant noodles under fluorescent light, the deals I'd fought to save, the code that had kept people alive during a global crisis. And yet, to them, I was still just Isabel, the quiet one, Venus's sister. But that night, something in me shifted. I realized I no longer wanted their validation. It wasn't anger, it was clarity. Their world was small, orbiting endlessly around its chosen Sunday. Mine was wide and wild, filled with code, light, and potential. I no longer needed a seat at their table. I could build my own. When I flew back to California, I didn't unpack for 2 days. I sat on the floor of my apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and silence, replaying that evening in my mind. The moment Venus smiled at me with polite pity. The way Mom brushed past me to refill her wine glass. The indifference in Dad's tone. For a long time, I thought their disregard was my wound, but now I understood it was my fuel. The same fire that had built a company from nothing could build something even bigger. A week later, I drove north to Napa Valley. I'd seen the property online, a 40-acre vineyard wrapped in mist, with rows of vines stretching toward the horizon. The listing described it as underdeveloped potential. I saw myself in that phrase. I walked the land at sunset, soil damp under my boots, the air heavy with the scent of grapes and possibility. Standing there, surrounded by silence, I felt something I hadn't in years: peace. This wasn't a trophy, it was a declaration. I could grow roots of my own, strong and steady, untouched by their blindness. That night, as the last light faded over the hills, I made a quiet promise to myself. I would stop waiting to be seen. I would stop showing up at tables where my chair was already taken. I would create my own place, one filled with warmth, laughter, and belonging. And when the time came, I'd open the doors wide for everyone who'd ever been left standing outside, just like me. I didn't choose Napa by accident. I chose it because vineyards demand what I had learned the hard way: patience. Vines take years before they bear fruit, their roots pushing deeper through stone and soil before they ever show anything above the surface. You can't rush a vineyard. You have to nurture it quietly, trust that what looks barren today will bloom if tended to with enough faith. In that, it felt like the story of my life. I had spent years buried under other people's shadows, growing silently in the dark, learning to survive on scraps of light. It only made sense that my new beginning would rise from a place built on slow, deliberate growth. The property was 45 acres of rolling hills just outside Street Helena, old farmland owned by a family relocating to Europe. The moment I arrived, the late afternoon sun poured over the valley like honey, turning the grape leaves gold. The air smelled of earth and oak, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk cut through the sky. The realtor was talking about irrigation systems and zoning permits, but I barely heard her. I was staring at the empty field behind the barn, imagining rows of vines stretching to the horizon, a wooden table under a pergola where laughter could finally belong to me. When I signed the contract, the total came to just over $6 million. A terrifying number once, now merely a symbol of everything I'd fought to earn. But to me, it wasn't about luxury, it was about roots. That day, I told myself I wasn't buying land. I was planting a future. I hired a small team of local builders and architects, people who understood the valley's rhythm. I wanted a home that felt honest, not a showpiece. The main house was built from cedar and reclaimed barnwood, each beam sanded but not polished to perfection. The exterior was warm and natural, blending into the slope of the land instead of standing out. We laid wide stone steps that curved down toward a gravel path, leading to a wide patio framed by wisteria vines. At its center stood a great wooden table 12 feet long, carved from a single walnut slab. I told the carpenter, "I want this table to hold laughter. It has to feel like it's been here for generations." He smiled and said, "Then we'll build it strong enough for 100 more." Inside, I designed the house around openness. The kitchen was the heart, an open space with black granite counters and copper pans hanging from a steel rack. The oven was brick, with a wood fire hearth perfect for baking bread. I added a long counter facing a wall of glass, so whoever cooked could look out at the vines instead of a blank wall. The living room stretched across the front, its glass walls folding open onto the patio. On cool mornings, fog from the valley rolled right up to the doorstep, wrapping the house in silver mist. At night, I could see the stars reflected in the wine-dark rows outside, so close it felt like the sky itself leaned down to rest on the vineyard. Behind the main house, I built a small wine shed and fermentation room, half for practical use, half for peace of mind. I wasn't planning to start a wine label, not yet, but I wanted to learn. There was something sacred about watching grapes transform under pressure, turning sweetness into something deeper, more complex. Maybe that's what I was doing, too, pressing my own past into something richer. Every choice I made carried quiet intention. The guest rooms were simple, with warm wood tones and cream linens. The main hall had a stone fireplace tall enough to stand inside, and shelves filled with local pottery instead of trophies. Outside, I planted lavender between the vines to draw bees, and along the pathway I laid bricks engraved with words like patience, faith, belonging. The architect laughed softly when he saw them. "Most people carve their initials," he said. "You're different." I shrugged. "Names fade, meaning doesn't." Months passed in the rhythm of construction, saws humming, hammers echoing, wind moving through the open beams. I came to the site almost every day, wearing old jeans and boots, my hair tied back, clipboard in hand. The workers called me La Jefa Tranquila, the quiet boss, because I rarely raised my voice but noticed every detail. When the first vine cuttings arrived, I planted them myself. Kneeling in the soil, I pressed my palms against the earth, feeling its cold, steady heartbeat. "This," I whispered, "is for the girl who never got an Easter basket." For years, no one had thought of what I needed. Now, the land would remember for me. By the time the house was finished, a year had passed. The vines had begun to take shape, tender shoots curling around the wires, leaves catching the light like tiny hands reaching upward. When I walked through them, the air shimmered with the promise of harvests I might never even see fully grown. But that didn't matter. The waiting was the point. Healing was not instant, it was cultivated. I kept everything quiet. No posts, no photos, no articles. When people asked where I'd gone, I just said I was taking time off. The vineyard wasn't for bragging rights or Instagram filters. It was my sanctuary, and I wanted it untouched by the noise of comparison. For once, I wanted something that existed simply because I loved it, not because I had to prove I could. Sometimes I'd stay there alone for days, sleeping on a mattress while the furniture was still being delivered. In the evenings, I'd light the fireplace, pour a glass of local wine, and sit by the window watching the hills fade into dusk. The silence was thick but comforting. In it, I could hear every version of myself: the child at the empty table, the student eating cold noodles, the woman typing through exhaustion. All of them finally resting under the same roof. I think that's why I never told my parents or Venus about the vineyard. They would have twisted it into something else. She just got lucky. She's trying to show off. Or worse, they would have claimed part of it, the way they claimed every story that should have been mine. I wanted this place to exist beyond their reach. Let them think I was still in Denver, still working, still quietly orbiting around their perfect daughter. Meanwhile, I was building something entirely my own. Each time I visited Napa after that, I brought something small to add: a rug woven by a local artisan, a hand-carved olive bowl, a single photograph of me and the team from the early MedChain days. Slowly, the house began to feel alive, its rooms breathing with memory. On the porch, I hung a wind chime made from recycled wine bottles, each one painted a different shade of blue. When the wind passed through, it sang a strange, glassy tune, melancholy and hopeful all at once. On the last day of construction, when the workers finally packed up their tools, I walked alone through every room, touching the tables, the doors, the window frames. The afternoon sun was pouring in, pooling golden light on the floorboards. I stood in the kitchen, facing the long counter that overlooked the valley, and realized something profound. For years, I had been chasing the idea of being seen by my parents, by Venus, by anyone. But standing there, surrounded by walls I had built, I understood that I didn't need to be seen. I just needed to exist fully. That night, I took a bottle of simple Merlot, stepped outside, and sat beneath the pergola. The vines rustled softly around me, still too young to bear fruit, but alive all the same. I raised the glass to the quiet hills and whispered, "To growth, to patience, to the little girl who never had her name on an egg." The sky dimmed into violet, and for the first time in my life, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. The message arrived on a quiet Thursday morning, just as the first light spilled across the vines. I was standing by the kitchen window of the Napa house, stirring sugar into my coffee, when my phone buzzed. The sender's name, Mom, glowed faintly on the screen. For a moment, I felt something soft, almost hopeful. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe, after everything, she wanted to reconnect. But when I opened the message, all it said was, "Easter brunch this year, just your sister's family, keeping it small." 8 words, wrapped in politeness, sharp enough to cut. I stared at the screen, watching the steam from my mug fade, my heartbeat slowing into that old, familiar ache. It was the same pattern I'd known since childhood: Venus at the center, everyone else rearranging their lives around her orbit. I could almost picture it: the pastel tablecloths, the gold cutlery, my mother cooing over Venus's baby while my father poured another glass of champagne, all under the illusion of family. The same table that never had a chair for me. I put the mug down slowly, the spoon clinking against the ceramic. I didn't cry, I didn't even feel angry. Just a strange calm settling in, the kind that comes after years of repetition. Still, something in me wanted to know the truth, whether it was just me who'd been erased again, or if this time they'd decided to shrink the circle even tighter. I picked up the phone and scrolled through my contacts until I reached Rachel, my cousin. She was Aunt Marianne's daughter, one of the few relatives who had always been kind to me without pretense. I hadn't seen her in months, but her honesty had never failed me. I pressed call 1. She answered after 2 rings, her voice warm but surprised. "Izzy, everything okay?" I hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Rachel, did you get an invitation from my parents for Easter brunch?" There was a pause on the other end, a silence heavy enough to give me the answer before she spoke. Then she laughed, not cruelly, but bitterly. Nope. Not just me, Mom didn't either. Grandma called earlier, furious. Apparently, your parents said they're keeping it immediate family only. Meaning Venus, her husband, and their baby. That's it. I felt my chest tighten, though the air around me was perfectly still. Not even Grandma? I asked quietly. Not even Grandma, she confirmed. She said it's the first time in 30 years she's been left out of Easter. She told me she hung up before she said something she'd regret. For a moment, all I could hear was the faint hum of wind moving through the vines outside. The absurdity of it hit me slowly, then completely the image of my parents, deliberately excluding not just me but everyone else, all to make sure Venus's family had the spotlight alone. This wasn't a small brunch, it was a coronation. A shrine built around their golden child, and everyone else had been written out of the story. I sank into the chair by the window, staring at the sunlight dripping across the kitchen tiles. Something inside me shifted, not a break, but a click, like a key turning in a long-locked door. I realized then that I was done trying to fit into a version of family that kept shrinking until it only held one name. I thought of Grandma, sitting alone in her house with her tea gone cold. I thought of Rachel's little boys, who'd been looking forward to their Easter egg hunt. And I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to prove I was worthy of a chair at a table that was never meant for me. No. I said quietly into the phone, more to myself than to Rachel. Not this year. What do you mean? She asked. I looked out the window, across the valley, where the rows of vines shimmered like threads of gold under the late morning Sunday. I said slowly, if that table doesn't have room for us, I'll build a new one. There was silence for a moment, then Rachel's soft laugh, the kind that comes from relief more than amusement. You're serious, aren't you? Completely, I said. I have a place big enough for everyone. A vineyard in Napa. The house is ready. We'll have Easter here, our own brunch, our own egg hunt, our own laughter. No hierarchy, no exclusions. She let out a low whistle. You've been hiding a vineyard from us? I smiled, though she couldn't see it. I've been hiding peace. Turns out, they were never looking for it. I'll tell Mom, she said, her tone brightening. And Grandma too. I think she needs this more than anyone. Oh. When we hung up, I felt something light and alive stir in my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for rejection, I was creating inclusion. I started calling the next person on the list. Eli, my cousin from Chicago, the quiet musician who always brought his guitar to reunions before they stopped inviting him. He picked up on the third ring, his voice groggy. Izzy, long time. I told him about the vineyard, the brunch, the open invitation. There was silence for a moment, then a chuckle. A family Easter that doesn't revolve around Venus? Count me in. I'll bring the guitar, and my girlfriend's dying to escape the city anyway. You'll have live music whether you want it or not. Next was Aunt Marianne, Rachel's mother, the one who used to bake pies big enough for an army. When she heard the plan, she went quiet for a long second, and I worried the call had dropped. Then she spoke softly, her voice breaking. You have no idea how long I've waited for someone to do this. Thank you, Isabel. Really. I could hear the tears in her voice. She promised to bring her homemade lemon tart, the recipe Grandma taught her decades ago. Uncle Ray was easier, no fuss, no questions. Just tell me what to bring, he said, his deep voice steady. Firewood, maybe? I'll haul it up from Modesto. We'll make sure your fireplace never dies down. Even Grandma didn't hesitate when I called. Finally, she said, her tone firm and almost amused. A table that belongs to the right people. I told her I'd arranged for her to stay in the master suite on the ground floor so she wouldn't have to climb the stairs. Perfect, she said. But only if you let me bring the chocolate eggs. I've still got the old molds your grandfather made. A vie. The calls kept going, one after another: second cousins, old uncles, a few family friends who'd long stopped showing up to the Hart family gatherings. By evening, my phone was filled with messages of surprise, excitement, even gratitude. The RSVP list had grown past 18 in just one day. Some sent quick notes like, "Wouldn't miss it for the world," or "Finally, an Easter that feels real." Others wrote long messages confessing how much they had dreaded the holiday for years, how tired they were of pretending that exclusion was tradition. Each reply felt like another beam of light entering a room that had been dark for too long. When the last call ended, I leaned back, watching the rain slide down the glass in silver streaks. My chest felt warm in a way it hadn't for a long time, not from pride, but from a sense of alignment, as if the world had quietly clicked into place. This wasn't about rebellion or revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming connection. The next day, I called a local travel service in San Francisco and arranged a 16-seater van to shuttle relatives from the airport to the vineyard. "We'll pick them up Saturday morning," the driver confirmed. "You want champagne in the van?" I laughed. "No, just bottled water and maybe some jazz." Then I booked a nearby farmstay for the overflow guests, a cozy bed and breakfast run by an elderly couple who'd moved to Napa decades ago. The moment I described the occasion, the owner's voice softened. "You remind me of my daughter," she said. "We'll make sure everyone feels at home." Back at the vineyard, I began planning the accommodations like a quiet symphony. Grandma would stay in the master suite facing the hills, her window opening to the lavender fields. Aunt Marianne and Rachel's family would take the two guest rooms upstairs, each with its own balcony and fireplace. Eli and his girlfriend could have the cottage by the wine shed, where the air smelled faintly of oak and fermentation. Uncle Ray, ever the outdoorsman, insisted on sleeping in his camper parked beside the barn. "Closest thing to a vacation I've had all year," he said when I called to confirm. The vineyard, once a silent retreat, began to hum with anticipation. I ordered fresh linens, extra cutlery, and folding tables to extend the dining setup outside under the pergola. The local caterer, a woman named Margaret who'd spent her life cooking for wineries, agreed to help prepare the feast. When I told her it was for a family who hadn't been together in decades, she smiled. "Then it has to taste like forgiveness," she said. At night, I made lists in a leather notebook: supplies, seating, decorations. But alongside each name, I also scribbled small notes of memory. "Rachel loves lavender tea." Eli asked him to play the old song Grandpa loved. Grandma add extra cushion to her chair. This wasn't about formality, it was about making sure no one felt invisible. The house smelled faintly of wood polish and early spring rain as I walked through it, imagining the laughter that would soon echo off its walls. For so long, I'd built things: companies, ideas, goals that had to prove my worth. But this gathering was different. It wasn't proof, it was presence. It was a chance to remind everyone, myself included, that belonging didn't have to come with conditions. When Rachel texted later that night, "Mom's already packing the lemon tart pan. Grandma's crying happy tears. This is going to be the best Easter ever," I found myself laughing quietly in the dark. Outside, the moon had risen, silvering the vineyard rows, each vine glowing faintly under its light. I stepped out onto the patio, the stone cool beneath my bare feet, and looked at the long wooden table under the pergola. It was still empty, but in my mind, I could already see it: the flicker of candles, the clink of glasses, the soft hum of Eli's guitar. For once, the table wouldn't belong to perfection, comparison, or pride. It would belong to everyone who showed up, who chose kindness over hierarchy. I stood there until the chill began to bite, whispering to the night, "No dress code. No expectations. Just come and be seen." And for the first time, I realized that this was more than an invitation, it was a promise. When Rachel texted later that night, "Mom's already packing the lemon tart pan. Grandma's crying happy tears. This is going to be the best Easter ever," I found myself laughing quietly in the dark. Outside, the moon had risen, silvering the vineyard rows, each vine glowing faintly under its light. I stepped out onto the patio, the stone cool beneath my bare feet, and looked at the long wooden table under the pergola. It was still empty, but in my mind, I could already see the flicker of candles, the clink of glasses, the soft hum of Eli's guitar. For once, the table wouldn't belong to perfection, comparison, or pride. It would belong to everyone who showed up, who chose kindness over hierarchy. I stood there until the chill began to bite, whispering to the night, no dress code, no expectations. Just come and be seen. And for the first time, I realized that this was more than an invitation, it was a promise. Easter morning arrived with a kind of light that seemed almost divine, the kind that spills slowly over the hills, soft and golden, warming every vine as if whispering, "You made it." From the balcony of my vineyard house, I watched the mist peel away, revealing neat rows of grapes that shimmered like ribbons in the dawn. Down the driveway, tire tracks began to appear one by one, the first van from San Francisco winding through the valley, its roof catching flashes of sunlight. I could already see Rachel's boys pressing their faces to the windows, their small hands pointing in excitement as the long table beneath the pergola came into view. By mid-morning, cars filled the gravel path in a slow, steady procession. Doors swung open, voices echoed through the air, laughter, greetings, disbelief. "Oh my God, Isabel. You built this? This place looks like something out of a dream." I stood at the edge of the patio, wiping my palms against my linen dress, heart thudding in quiet rhythm. The first person to reach me was Grandma, leaning on her cane but glowing like she had just stepped out of sunlight itself. "You didn't tell me it was paradise," she said, her voice trembling, eyes sweeping across the sprawling vineyard. "If I had known, I'd have moved here." I hugged her tightly, smelling the faint perfume of elderflower on her scarf. "You were always meant to," I whispered. The rest of the family poured in like a tide. Aunt Marianne carried her famous lemon tart, wrapped in a checkered towel. Eli arrived with his guitar slung across his shoulder and a bottle of wine tucked under his arm. Rachel's husband helped unload baskets from the van, her kids already darting toward the lower field shouting, "Eggs, eggs," as if they could already sense the treasure waiting. Uncle Ray parked his camper near the barn and gave me a bear hug that almost lifted me off my feet. "You did good, kid," he said simply. Those words, so few, so genuine, meant more than any grand praise could. When everyone had gathered under the pergola, the string trio began to play softly, a light waltz that drifted through the vines. The table gleamed beneath the sun. White linen rippling in the breeze, tulips and daffodils blooming in jars, the pastel eggs at each seat catching the light like gems. Margaret and her team moved gracefully between the guests, setting out quiche still steaming, platters of smoked salmon bagels, eggs Benedict gleaming with hollandaise, honey-glazed ham glistening in the warmth. Coffee poured in dark streams, glasses of mimosa sparkled like liquid gold. I stepped forward, my hands trembling slightly. The music faded. For a moment, the world seemed to hush, even the wind paused between the rows of vines. I didn't give a long speech. I didn't talk about forgiveness or wounds or the past. I just looked around the table, at every familiar face that had once been pushed to the periphery, and said 4 simple words. "Thank you for coming." That was all it took. A slow smile spread across the table, the kind that travels like a wave. Glasses lifted, clinking softly. Eli strummed the first lazy chords of a tune we all half remembered from childhood. Aunt Marianne wiped her eyes, pretending it was from the breeze. Grandma reached across the table, her hand finding mine. Her fingers were frail but steady, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "For the first time in so many years," she said, eyes glistening, "I feel like I'm at a real family table." The words hit me like sunlight through water, warm, bright, cleansing. Around us, the brunch unfolded in a kind of harmony I hadn't thought possible. Rachel's kids giggled as they sipped strawberry juice from ceramic mugs. Uncle Ray told a story about nearly burning his truck engine during a camping trip. Even Eli's girlfriend, shy at first, was soon laughing with Aunt Marianne about how hard it was to make perfect shortbread. There were no comparisons, no careful pauses when one name was mentioned. Just conversation fluid, equal, free. After dessert, when the strawberry shortcake had been reduced to crumbs and laughter, I stood and called out, "All right, everyone who's ready for the egg hunt?" The children cheered, jumping from their seats, their pastel baskets swinging from their wrists. 3 zones, I announced, grinning. Kids in the lower field, teens behind the barn, and adults on the hill. No excuses, everyone hunts. They scattered like birds released into the wind. Down the slope, Rachel's youngest squealed as he spotted a pink egg beneath the lavender bushes. "I found one," he shouted, holding it high like treasure. The teens wove between barrels, bumping into each other, laughter echoing across the vineyard. Even the adults joined in, Grandma sitting by the fence clapping each time someone held up a find, Uncle Ray shaking his head as he discovered a blue egg hidden inside a flower pot. The string trio shifted to an upbeat rhythm. Sunlight filtered through the vines, dappling the ground in gold and green. The air smelled of grass, bread, and faintly of fermenting grapes, the aroma of life itself. Eli strummed his guitar near the pergola, the melody curling around the laughter like a gentle wind. For a brief, impossible moment, it felt like every wound, every absence, had been rewritten into something soft and whole. Then came the golden egg. Rachel's eldest, a quiet girl with freckles and a shy smile, found it beneath the oldest vine. She gasped and held it up, and everyone gathered around her. The gold leaf shimmered in the sun like fire. "Open it," someone shouted. She peeled it carefully, her small fingers trembling, revealing the note inside. She read it aloud, voice steady despite her young age. "You are seen." The silence that followed was different, not awkward, not heavy, it was reverent. Grandma closed her eyes, murmuring a soft amen. Aunt Marianne reached for her daughter's hand. I felt something deep inside me loosen, a knot I'd carried for 30 years finally unraveling. The message wasn't just for her, it was for all of us. As the afternoon wore on, the sky turned a luminous blue. Plates were cleared, and new ones replaced them, piled high with leftovers no one wanted to waste. The trio packed up, and Eli took over, sitting on the low wall with his guitar. His voice was rough but full, the lyrics weaving through the vines. "We're all still here, we're all still home." People hummed along, clapping to the rhythm. Rachel's kids danced barefoot in the grass. Grandma leaned back in her chair, her eyes half closed, face tilted toward the sundae. When the song ended, we gathered for a photo in front of the pergola. Everyone squeezed in close, no one pushed aside, no one left out. The camera clicked just as a gust of wind sent a swirl of petals across the table, catching the light like tiny fragments of gold. Rachel sent the photo to the family group chat right after, captioning it, "Easter at Isabel's Vineyard. The best one yet." Minutes later, the feed came alive. Little hearts began to appear, red, pink, yellow, flooding beneath a photo. Someone shared a short video of the kids running through the vines. Another posted a picture of the golden egg and its note. There were no snide remarks, no awkward silences, no mentions of my parents or Venus. Just simple words. Beautiful. Wish we'd done this sooner. Finally feels like family again. I sat quietly at the edge of the pergola, scrolling through the messages as the sun dipped lower behind the hills. The air smelled faintly of earth and grapes, and the light turned honey-colored. For the first time, the family chat, once a hollow space filled with obligation and polite distance, felt alive, sincere, and safe. I looked up at the table, now littered with empty plates, tulip petals, and pastel shells cracked open. The wind lifted the linen, rustling softly, like a sigh of relief from the land itself. And I realized then, this was the moment everything had been leading to: the brunch, the hunt, the laughter, the golden egg. Not revenge, not redemption, but reclamation. The table had finally been set for everyone. And for the first time in my life, everyone had a name. The next morning, the vineyard was wrapped in fog, quiet and silver. Dew clung to the grape leaves like pearls, and the long table under the pergola still held traces of yesterday: crumbs of bread, tulip petals, half-burnt candles. I stood by the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee, the scent of roasted beans mingling with faint echoes of laughter that seemed to linger in the walls. For a moment, everything felt perfectly still until my phone started to buzz. At first, it was just one vibration. Then another. Then a string of them, each sharper than the last. I turned the screen face up. Mom. Missed call. Then Dad. Then Venus. And again, Mom. 10, 15, 20 missed calls stacking one after another like a silent avalanche. I stared at the screen without moving, a part of me already knowing what it was about. When the 20th call came, I let it ring out. The silence afterward was heavier than before. Grandma shuffled into the kitchen a few minutes later, wrapped in her pale blue robe, her hair silver and soft as the morning mist. "They've found the photos, haven't they?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of tea. I nodded. The image of our Easter Eli's guitar, the long table glowing beneath the vines, the golden egg had spread across the family group chat like wildfire. Someone must have shown it around town. I could already imagine Mom's expression. Shock, indignation, fear of what people would say. The phone buzzed again. I sighed, set my cup down, and answered. "Good morning, Mom." "Whoa." Her voice cut through before I could say another word. "Isabel, do you realize what you've done? The entire town is talking about your little brunch spectacle. Pastor mentioned it in his sermon this morning. He said it's caused division in the family. And do you know how humiliating that is for us?" I exhaled slowly, steadying my tone. "Humiliating. I invited people you left out. I didn't do anything cruel. You made us look like fools," she snapped. "You knew we had planned a small gathering with Venus's family. Why would you host your own event and drag everyone else into it? Why do you always have to compete?" I glanced at Grandma, who had sat down at the table across from me, her tea steaming between her hands. Her eyes told me everything. "Put it on speaker." I pressed the button. "I'm not competing with anyone," I said quietly. "You told me, in your own message, just Venus's family this year. I only followed your words." I made another table, one that had room for everyone. There was a pause on the other end, just long enough to hear my father's sigh in the background. Then his voice joined in, calm but sharp. "You should have consulted us before doing something so public. Venus's friends saw the photos online. People are asking why she wasn't invited. It's embarrassing." "Embarrassing," Grandma repeated, her tone steady but ice cold. "Robert, what's truly embarrassing is how long you've ignored your own daughter." The silence that followed was thick, electric. Mom tried to interject, but Grandma's voice cut through, stronger now, every word deliberate. "For 30 years, I've watched this pattern. When Isabel was 14, you told her she was too old for an Easter basket while Venus got a bracelet and a photo in the church bulletin. When Isabel got into Stanford, you said it was too far away. When she sold her company and could have bought this entire town, you said technology was too complicated to understand. Every milestone she's ever had, you've turned away. And now that she's built a home big enough for all of you, you complain that she made it too visible." Mom's breath hitched on the other end. "Mother, please, that's not fair." "Oh, don't you start with, 'not fair,' Judy." Grandma's voice was calm, but it carried a quiet thunder that made even me stop breathing. "Fairness is exactly what's been missing from this family. You've spent decades shrinking the table smaller and smaller until it could only fit Venus and her spotlight. And now you're angry that Isabel built her own? You call it competition, but I call it survival." The silence after that felt endless. I could hear faint movement, a door creaking, maybe my father rubbing his forehead, the sound of guilt in motion. Finally, my mother's voice returned, softer, thinner. "I never meant to hurt anyone. We just thought she preferred her independence." I almost laughed, but the sound wouldn't come. Independence isn't something I chose over you, I said. It's something I had to grow when I realized you'd never make room for me. My father sighed again, heavier this time. We just wanted to keep things simple, he muttered. Simple? Grandma echoed, incredulous. You mean small. There's a difference. You don't simplify love by cutting people out of it. The air on the line was brittle now, filled with words that wanted to come but couldn't. I looked out the window at the vineyard glowing faintly under the morning sunday. The vines looked peaceful, unconcerned with gossip or pride. They grew in silence, patient and strong the way I had learned to. I took a slow breath. Mom, Dad, I said finally, I didn't host that brunch to spite you. I did it because I was tired of pretending exclusion was tradition. I wanted a family table that didn't revolve around one name. Mom's voice trembled. You could have called. You could have told us. I met Grandma's gaze, then spoke the truth plainly. Would you have listened? There was no answer. Only the faint static of a house that had nothing left to defend. After a while, I said quietly, if you want to really talk, not argue or rewrite history, I'll be here. But not as the daughter begging for a seat. I've already built my table. Aggression. Then I pressed the button and ended the call. The silence afterward was immense, but it wasn't empty, it was earned. Grandma exhaled, setting her teacup down with a small clink. Well, she said softly, I think that's the first honest conversation this family's had in 20 years. I smiled faintly, leaning back in my chair. Do you think they'll ever understand? She gave a slow shrug. Maybe not today. But they'll remember the echo of what was said. And one day, when they're tired of the noise, they'll hear it clearly. Outside, the fog had begun to lift. The sunlight spilled across the vineyard, turning every drop of dew into a tiny prism of gold. My phone lay silent on the table, the screen dark, finally still. I knew more calls would come. More explanations. More attempts to rewrite what had already been lived. But this time, I didn't owe them an answer. Because some conversations aren't meant to end in agreement, only in truth. And I had finally spoken mine. A week passed before I decided to reach out. The vineyard had gone quiet again, the laughter of Easter now just a warm echo carried by the wind between the vines. The long table had been cleared, the linens washed and folded away, but traces of that day still lingered, the faint scent of bread in the kitchen, the tulip petals dried on the gravel, the sound of Eli's guitar still hanging somewhere in the rafters. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was full, alive. That Monday morning, as the sunlight spilled across the valley, I wrote a message that took me 3 tries to get right. Dinner here Friday. Just immediate family. I didn't dress it up. No explanations. No expectations. I wasn't inviting them to reopen wounds only to see whether they had the courage to sit down and finally listen. They arrived just before sunset. The light was turning gold over the hills when I saw their car crawling up the gravel drive. My father stepped out first, wearing his usual pressed shirt, but the confidence in his posture had softened. My mother followed, scarf wrapped tightly, her eyes avoiding mine until she reached the porch. Venus came last, her coat too formal for the countryside, her hands clutching her phone like a lifeline. For a moment, no one spoke. The air between us felt like glass, fragile, reflective, full of the things we'd never said. I opened the door. Come in, I said simply. Inside, the house glowed with candlelight. No music, no decorations, no performance, just a single wooden table set for 4. The smell of roasted vegetables and bread lingered in the air. I had prepared everything myself, a modest dinner of lemon-roasted chicken, asparagus salad, and the sourdough I had baked that morning. The plates were mismatched ceramic, the same ones I used every day. There was no centerpiece, only a row of small candles flickering quietly between us. We ate in near silence at first. The only sounds were the clink of silverware, the soft rustle of napkins, the occasional clearing of a throat. When the plates were half empty, I set my fork down and drew a long breath. "There are some things I need to say," I began. My mother looked up, startled, but said nothing. My father's eyes fixed on his plate. Venus's hand stilled over her glass. "I grew up believing Easter was for everyone," I said slowly. "But somehow, every year, it became less about family and more about Venus. The year I was 14, I didn't get a basket. You told me I was too old. But I remember sitting there, pretending I didn't care, while Venus got a bracelet and a photo with the neighbors. I smiled, but something cracked that day. My mother's lips parted as if to speak, then closed again. When I got into Stanford, you said it was too far. You didn't say congratulations. When I was eating instant noodles in a rented room, building my company from nothing, you sent photos of Venus's new office. When I sold that company for $120 million, I brought you a gift from New York, and you said, I looked at my father. You said technology was too complicated and changed the subject to Venus's promotion. The air was so still I could hear the soft sputter of candle wax. I'm not saying this to blame you, I continued. I just need you to know how it felt to spend a lifetime achieving everything I could, only to be invisible in my own family. I spent years believing something was wrong with me. That no matter how much I accomplished, I'd always be the girl sitting at the kids' table, waiting for her name to be called. My father's hand tightened around his glass. For a long time, he didn't look up. When he finally did, his voice was quiet, stripped of its usual certainty. Maybe I didn't see it all, he said. I thought you were strong. Independent. I thought you didn't need what Venus needed. Mom's eyes glistened, her fingers trembling against the tablecloth. I told myself the same, she said softly. That you didn't want us hovering. I thought you'd outgrown needing attention. But now I realize I was wrong. I didn't give you space, I gave you absence. Her words hung between us like fragile glass. I nodded, not in forgiveness yet, but in understanding. Then I turned to Venus. She hadn't spoken once, her expression unreadable, her gaze fixed somewhere near the candles. For a moment, I thought she might stay silent until the end. But then she lifted her head. Her eyes, usually sharp, looked hollow like someone standing in the shadow of her own reflection. I don't know what to say, she murmured. I didn't realize what it cost you, for me to be their favorite. I thought that's just how things were. She gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. I'm sorry. The apology wasn't perfect, but it was real. I took a slow breath and said quietly, I didn't invite you here to settle scores. I invited you because I needed to speak those words out loud. And because I wanted you to see that I've already moved on. They all looked at me then, waiting. I've built my own table now, I said. It's open to anyone who wants to come, not to take, not to perform, but to be real. If you ever want to be part of that, there's always a seat. But I won't chase anyone to fill it. For a long moment, no one spoke. The candles flickered, their flames bending toward one another like small, trembling hearts. My father gave a quiet nod. My mother reached out across the table, not to take my hand, but to touch the wood in front of her like acknowledging something sacred. Venus looked down, her face unreadable, but her eyes glimmered with something close to surrender. When dinner ended, I walked them out to the porch. The sky had turned a deep violet, the last light spilling over the vineyards in streaks of pink and gold. My mother hugged me briefly, my father shook my hand, and Venus hesitated before whispering, "The view's beautiful." Then they left. As their car disappeared down the hill, I stood in the fading light, the air still carrying the faint sweetness of spring. I walked slowly down to the lower vineyard, where the vines were young and fragile, their leaves trembling in the evening breeze. I knelt beside one of them and dug a small hollow in the soil. From my pocket, I took out a single golden egg one I had kept aside from the Easter hunt. Its surface gleamed softly under the twilight. I placed it gently beneath the vine and whispered, "For the girl who waited." Then I covered it with soil and pressed my hand over it, as if sealing a promise. The wind moved through the rows, carrying the scent of earth and new life. Above me, The first stars began to appear quiet, unassuming, yet unshakably present. I rose, brushed the dirt from my palms, and turned back toward the house. The candles in the window flickered faintly, their light reaching out like an invitation. In that moment, I realized healing doesn't arrive in applause or grand gestures. It arrives in small, steady breaths in the silence after truth is spoken, in the space you make for peace. I no longer needed their approval, nor their praise. I had built something stronger, a place where love wasn't conditional, where every name had a seat. If you've ever been excluded, if you've ever waited for someone to notice you, remember this. You don't need anyone to hand you a chair. You can build the entire table yourself. And if you're listening now, tell me, where are you tuning in from? Because somewhere out there, someone like you is doing the same thing, planting their own vineyard, carving their own space, and whispering to the part of themselves that once waited too long. You are seen.